Hello and welcome to You Sew You. My name's Zoe and this is my channel about all the crafty bits and pieces I get up to. I knit, I sew, I crochet, I weave from time to time, I spin on a drop spindle and whatever else takes my crafty fancy really. So this week we're going to take a little bit of a look at some beadwork, just like an introduction to some of the types of beading that can be done. So grab a brew, put your feet up and let's get started. Okay, so welcome back to any returning viewers and to any new viewers, a very warm welcome to you. As I said in the intro, we are looking at beading today. Now there are loads of different ways that you can use beads in your crafting. You can attach them to knitting, you can use them in embroidery, there are beaded cross stitch kits, a whole ton of stuff. I mean, beaded jewellery and all sorts. But today we're going to be focusing particularly on bead weaving because that's what I started doing recently. If obviously I do any other forms of beading, I will let you know. I think beaded embroidery is probably going to be something I would enjoy because I enjoy my cross stitch and embroidery and that kind of thing, so it seems like a logical setup. But yeah, so bead weaving. There are two forms of bead weaving to bear in mind. There is on loom bead weaving and there's off loom bead weaving. So I have a bead weaving loom, which is this one. They come in all sorts of different shapes. They're usually kind of flat, so they sit on the table, but I chose this one because the weaving is on an angle. I thought that would probably be better for my back. And basically with bead weaving, you string the beads onto your needle, put them below or behind, in this case, the warp threads, position them between the warp threads, and then bring your needle back through them over the top, and that seals them in place. So the beads are nicely lined up and straight. I'm not going to demonstrate on this project because there's 60 odd beads on here. So once I've finished this project and put something smaller on, I will do a demonstration video of bead weaving on a loom. We're going to look also at some off-loom projects. Okay, so there are various different stitches that you can do with off-loom bead weaving. Essentially you're sewing the beads together. So my first project was a piece of even stitch flat peyote, which is this one. So when we say even count or even stitch, we mean that there's an even number of beads in each row. And it's worked flat, so it's worked front and back. My next project was an odd count piece of peyote, so as you can imagine, that means there's an odd number of beads in each row. So they are worked slightly differently. We're going to focus on even stitch today, even count today. But I also wanted to show you this piece, which is a tubular piece of peyote stitch. It's got a wooden core inside, and it's where I keep my bead weaving needles. Not the ones for the loom, the ones for the off-loom projects. So this was worked in the same way, but tubular to go around the stitch holder. So you can work peyote stitch it flat, front and back, you can work it in the round. Any patterns will come in charts, as they will for the loom. Years and years ago I bought a couple of bead weaving books in a random bead shop in London and then didn't get around to buying the stuff to make things. I will say there does tend to be a Native American tribal kind of influence to the patterns in these books. They are old books. I am using them to learn the techniques. More so in the Loom Book actually than the off-loom. That seems a little bit less Native American inspired. So this is the Loom Book, and you can see, just looking at the front cover, that looks very kind of Native American, Native Latin American type style to me. I don't know enough about the cultures of the various different tribes to pin that down any further than that could be kind of Mayan, Inca, or it could be a Native American style design. Wolves, obviously, less native, but still. And this one is very kind of Native American influenced. But But I mean, that's okay. I'm okay with influence. I'm not okay with appropriation. So yeah, it's very, very sort of American inspired. It may well be an American book. Yeah, an American price on the back. It's an American book. So that's my loom weaving book. I also have a peyote stitch book. So this is the sort of thing you can do with peyote stitch. I'm obviously not going to flick through the pages and show you the patterns because these are bought books, they're paid for. Don't know where this book originated from. The price is in British on the back in a sticker. It's not like printed on the thing, so who knows. So yeah, so we've got pictures and tapestry type things done with peyote stitch. I imagine they'll be quite fiddly to get started because they're quite wide, and in a minute when I demonstrate some peyote stitch for you, you'll see why I think that might be a little bit fiddly to get started when it's that wide. We've still got the American Eagle there, but the rest of these aren't quite so directly inspired by Native American culture. There is, however, on the back pattern, it says American Eskimo is one of the patterns. Is Eskimo even the right word? Are they not Inuits? I don't know. But mostly these seem to be less sort of directly lifted from those cultures. And obviously once I've learnt the skills, I can design my own. Woo! I am really interested in looking into the European history of bead weaving as well, because we were working with beads in Europe before we went to the New World. It's a dreadful term that they coined in the, what was it, 1600s? It was already there. We didn't build an extension. But there we go. That's history for you. Right, so I'm going to move the camera around and I'm going to show you what a peyote stitch chart might look like. Just kind of like an overview and how you might read it. And then I will demonstrate a little bit of even count flat peyote for you. Odd count is worked in very much the same way. You just have to do a little bit of finagling at the end of the row to get your needle back in the right place, but I will cover that more at another point, probably in another video, because I don't want this one to be too long. Okay, so let me reposition you and we'll get going. Okay, so hopefully the angle isn't too wonky for you. I just wanted to make sure that I was able to do this without hitting the camera. So what you can see in front of you is peyote stitch chart. This one is actually started out for tubular peyote, because we've got this red line there, and this was included with a kit from the bead shop in Nottingham. On the other side it's got the pattern for the needle case cover, so I'm obviously showing you the blank side that they've provided so you can design your own. The red line indicates where each round is going to start, so with tubular peyote it's going to spiral around, but we're going to look at flat peyote, so just ignore that red line for now. So the chart, as you can see, the squares are offset a little bit, and I've coloured in the first couple of rows for a few stitches. At the moment it's coloured in as if it's for odd count, because I obviously wasn't paying attention. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 beads there, so I'm just going to put a 12th one on here. So we've got 2 rows, and I've used different colours for the 2 rows coloured in so far. So you would start much as you would with a knitting pattern. You would start at this side. When you're going flat, you would work across, then you would work back, then you would work across, then you would work back. And when you're doing tubular, you would always start at this end. But we're, as I say, working with flat. So that's row 1 and row 2. You can see they're kind of offset a little bit. If we were going to put row 3 in, that would come in here. I'm using 2 colours to kind of hopefully make this clearer for you. And then row 4 would come in here. So you do end up with this like crenellation effect at the top and the bottom of peyote stitch. There's another type of bead weaving stitch that kind of looks similar at first glance when you look at the project. It's called brick stitch, but it's worked in a slightly different way to peyote, and you end up with the flat lines at the top and the bottom of the piece and the crenellations at the sides, but I haven't learnt that stitch yet, so that'll be demonstrated at another point. So I have here in my bead tray some bead matting that again came in with a project kit from Bead Shop Nottingham, and some size 6 beads. These ones are Tohos, which I got from Beads Direct. These ones I've had in my stash for ages. I don't know what brand they are. I got them from that big online retailer that sells everything under the sun. These are beads that I've bought for knitting with, which is why they're the size 6s, but they are left over from projects. Thing to bear in mind with bead sizes is the larger the number, the smaller the bead. So I'm using my 6s, they're my largest beads, to hopefully make it a little bit clearer on screen. The other thing I'm going to use is this, which is a bead stopper. I have seen people on YouTube using contrast coloured beads to stop their bead weaving, but I am using a bead stopper. And obviously a bead weaving needle, which is a flexible type of needle, and I've threaded that up with some black Nymo thread. Normally I would use something that would disappear into the project, but for the sake of you being able to see what I'm doing, I've gone with black. This is, I believe, in Nymo. It came in a kit from the bead shop in Nottingham, and it comes on a little bobbin like this. It's a nylon beading thread, so it's nice and strong. There is another type of thread that you can get that came in the other kit from the bead shop in Nottingham. That's a bonded nylon. I think it's called Firewire. It's a bit more like fishing line, and I didn't like the feel of that. I much prefer the feel of the Nymo. So, a little bit before the end of the tail, I am going to place my bead stopper. This just means that as I'm working my first few rows, the bead's not going to fall off the thread. Once you've worked your first couple of rows, they're not going to go anywhere anyway. So we've got our pattern here, obviously not the same colours, but that's okay. And to begin with, we actually need to pick up these beads for the first 2 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 beads in total with alternating colours. So 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So there's my first 2 rows of beads. I'm going to slide these down the thread to my bead stopper. Okay, so I've got my first 2 rows lined up. Not going to worry too much about the pattern at the moment because this is more about showing you how to do the stitch. So I'm going to pick up, I'm going to do row 3 in this colour. In fact, no, we'll do it in that colour. That makes more sense. So pick up the next bead, and we're going to take the needle through the second bead. Obviously, if you're doing a pattern, you're going to be following what the chart says for what colour to pick up next. But that first bead of row 3 sits on top of your first bead of row 1, and it goes through the first bead of row 2. So pick up another one. This is going to be a little bit tricky to see between my fingers, I realise. Huge thumbs. So then we go through the next row 2 bead. So you're going through alternate beads each time. We're going to do the same all the way along to the end of our row. Oops, try not to stitch through your bead stopper. And obviously I wouldn't have that issue if I was using a contrast bead to stop my beads going anywhere. I just think the concept of these little spring stoppers is so simple. They're quite easy to use. Okay, so it's still a little flopsy wopsy at the moment, but you can see we've got 3 rows. We've got the gold, the mauve and the gold. So row 4, we're going to work in the same way. So I'm going to be picking up the mauve. It actually gets a bit easier from row 4 onwards because we've got these crenellations, whereas obviously the last row the first 2 rows were next to each other, and now they're sort of standing up proud. So we're going to go through the next bead that's standing up. Obviously your tension is managed by how firmly you pull the thread through. I'm not worrying too much about tension at the moment. There we go. What I've been doing whilst I've been doing my peyote stitch is actually leaving my bead stopper on pretty much the whole way through the project, because that I find is a nice easy visual reference for where the start of my rows are. But actually you've got the tail of thread there, which will also give you a reference. And now that we've got a few rows on, I can actually take off my bead stopper, and those beads are not going anywhere. And they're firmly held on, woven in, and you would just continue in the same way until you got the length of project that you were looking for. And then you'd obviously weave in your ends and put any fixings on that you needed if it was a bracelet, for instance. So yeah, it's quite a simple process. I quite enjoy it. It's quite relaxing. I can do it in very little space, and actually it's quite an affordable craft. You need very few supplies, and these sorts of beads, these Toho beads, are fairly cheap to get hold of. There's another brand called Miyuki that's also fairly cheap to get hold of. Those seem to be the better two brands, but you can of course use whatever's available to you. I say better because from my knitting bead knowledge, they seem to be the ones that have the more consistent hole size, which is probably less of an issue for this, as it would be for, say, loom weaving, or when you're weaving, when you're knitting with beads, because you need to get the yarn through the hole. So yeah, so have a little play around. I have 2 main suppliers that I go to for beads. One is the bead shop in Nottingham because they are local to me, and the other is Beads Direct because they are quick. I mean, seriously, I've ordered stuff quite late in the day, sort of mid-afternoon, and they've arrived the next day from Beads Direct. They are phenomenally quick. Obviously that doesn't always happen, it's sometimes a couple of days, but yeah, they're pretty quick, and they've got quite a good range of stuff and tutorials and stuff. Bead Shop Nottingham also has a YouTube channel. There are obviously other bead suppliers around, they're just the 2 that I go to. Only the 2 that I go to at the moment. That may change over time as I get more into it. But yeah, have a play around, and at some point I'll show you odd count peyote and tubular peyote and some loom beading and things. But I think even count is probably the easier one to get started with peyote stitch. So I hope you found that useful. Now I aim to put a video up every weekend, so Friday, Saturday or Sunday. Once a month it's a podcasty what I've been working on type video, and in the meantime it's more sort of vloggy type videos or focused on a particular craft or project that I'm working on. So I will see you again in the next video, but until then, happy crafting and bye bye for now.